Hello BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2021, a 5-month mission I'm embarked on with a bunch of other booktubers to talk about all things Star Trek for the rest of the year. Star Trek books, specifically. Star Trek fiction. And there's a lot of it, a huge amount. So we're breaking it down by franchise, and the month of August, which is swiftly dwindling, at least on the calendar. Outside, in the non-air-conditioned world, it's 100 degrees, it's 70% humidity, it has been that way for days and days. It shows no signs of ever not being that way. So outside, it's mid-July in Abu Dhabi, rather than the beginning of September in Boston. But on the calendars here in BookTube, we are doing the original series for the month of August, and gearing up to do the next generation in September. So I've been reading a lot of Star Trek in August, rereading a lot of Star Trek of original series books. I actually thought maybe that it was a weakness to do all this rereading, and that maybe I should scour the bookstores, scour Barnes & Noble for a brand new original series Star Trek novel. As far as I know, I'm all caught up. But I haven't actually been able to do that, and it looks like I won't be able to. I was hoping that I would maybe start to do that this week, but it's been too hot to go anywhere. At 100 degrees in the middle of the day, that means any errand that isn't essential is dangerous, and the essential ones are dangerous as well. So I of course haven't made a frivolous trip to a bookstore. I haven't checked around online either to see if maybe I can get an electronic transfer of a book right away. With any luck, maybe Star Trek: The Next Generation, maybe some parts of late September, or maybe a few days in October, the temperature will go back down to double digits. And it will be at least theoretically possible to go to a bookstore and encounter a Star Trek original series novel that I haven't read. But in the meantime, I have been going back to books that I have read, and I've been sticking to the mainstream, just the flagship pocketbook paperbacks of Star Trek that had the 3-line borders and the number up in the corner. I've just been sticking to those, rereading a lot of those. A lot of those I only read once. And the one I picked today is by Jean DeWeese, who did a few Star Trek novels, some of which are I remember being better than this one. This is Renegade. And this is the story of the Enterprise is called to help with a planet that the Federation has been asking to join the ranks of the Federation for a long time. The planet has been refusing, and the planet has a colony, another world in its solar system, that they benevolently administer. It's a fairly ideal example of a planet and a planet and a colony, ideal for the time when this book came out, which is about 20 years ago. It couldn't be published today, and the author would be murdered, not just canceled and hounded off of social media, but murdered by an anonymous figure as she's going to her car at night for even writing the word colony, much less suggesting in any way that a colonized society might have some benefit from being colonized. That is totally forbidden in 2021. Totally forbidden. It can get a 30-year tenured academic abruptly drummed out of his job to even suggest that there may have been an upside, any upside, to colonialism. So this is a forbidden book now. No one would ever reprint this if they knew what was in it. But that is the context where the Enterprise is sent to this planet. Now, unbeknownst to the Enterprise, the Klingons have concocted an elaborate scheme of revenge against Kirk. This is another novel along the lines of several that we've seen recently in my own BookTrek 2021 that has basically the same mechanism behind it, which is the Klingons hating Jim Kirk, wanting to disgrace him, wanting to traumatize him, wanting to kill him somehow. A lot of that, I think, was spurred by the movies that enhanced that a lot, but that made him sort of the ultimate cold warrior against the Klingons. But at the beginning of this book, when Spock and McCoy beam down to this planet, which of course, keep in mind, they never would. They never would. Your first officer and your science officer, your chief medical officer, they have no business even being on the mission, much less beaming down first. It would never, ever in a million years happen. But, I mean, just imagine it. Imagine if the USS Enterprise, the actual seagoing warship, the USS Enterprise, imagine if it were called to a diplomatic hub somewhere in the Sea of Hormuz. And they get there, they pull off station, they've got a tender ready to go to shore, and the captain is looking over the duty roster and says, all right, who should go? I'm going to send my doctor. Would never in a million years happen. But It does, and the minute that Kirk and Spock beam over to this planet, they disappear and are presumed dead. We see Kirk go through a kind of kabuki grief over what would happen if he lost his two best friends. Has to go along with the mission anyway. And, of course, they're not dead. Instead, they've been taken captive by the main villain of the book, who is not a Klingon. And it's revealed fairly early on in the book who it is, and the book is 20 years old, and no one's going to want to read it, and it will never be reprinted. It can't be reprinted, because it's about a beneficial colonial relationship, so it's forbidden. So I might as well say that the villain is Lieutenant Commander Ben Finney, from the great Star Trek episode Court Martial, where it seems like Jim Kirk has made a drastic mistake during an ion storm that cost the life of his records officer, Lieutenant Commander Ben Finney, who was a longtime friend of his, to such a point that they were such intimate friends at one point that Ben Finney names his daughter Jamie after Jim Kirk. So they've been friends for decades, because she's a woman in her 20s when we meet her in Court Martial. And the records on board the Enterprise seem to corroborate the idea that Kirk did, in fact, jettison the pod that Finney was in and kill him prematurely when there was no crisis. So it's the occasion for the showrunner, for Gene Roddenberry and all of his writers, to do a courtroom drama in Star Trek, and they do it just to the nines. It's such a fantastic episode. Just fantastic. The characters, our favorite characters, have to give testimony in court at Kirk's court-martial. Kirk is, the opposing attorney is Ariel Shaw, who is not only an old friend, but an old lover of Jim Kirk's, and who's going to prosecute him anyway. And Spock has a great, fantastic moment on the stand, where he says, "If I let go of a hammer on a planet with a positive gravity, I need not see it fall to know that it has, in fact, fallen." He says that panic is not in Jim Kirk's nature. He could not act out of panic or malice. It's not in his nature. But he's forced to say that's just a judgment of his. It's not an observed fact. And, of course, the standout guest character in the show is Samuel Cogley, attorney at law, who loves books, good old-fashioned printed books, and he was a bit of a crank, bit of an old crank, but an excellent attorney. And those of you who've seen the episode, you will know how it ends. You, of course, know if I'm telling you that the villain in this book is Lieutenant Commander Ben Finney, then you know perfectly well he doesn't die in court-martial. He isn't actually dead. That's the great moment where Samuel Cogley says, "I submit to this court that Lieutenant Commander Ben Finney is still alive," that he has been eluding the search for him, and that he falsified the records that say that Jim Kirk acted at the wrong time. It's a humdinger of an episode, and in this book, Lieutenant Commander Finney is coming back for his revenge, because he's still alive at the end of the episode. He is captured alive as a sobbing husk of a shadow of his former self. And that is a little predictable, and this novel is a little predictable, and there aren't a whole lot of great moments. When Spock and McCoy are when they're hostages together, they reminisce, they think a little, they have some human moments together that are well done, but it's a pretty pro forma book. You kind of know what's going to happen from the beginning. You know what's going to happen at almost every stage along the way. There aren't any really effective surprises, and the world that the Enterprise go to is not particularly well drawn. I think the main interest in this book, again, it's for Star Trek fans, and I think the main interest in this book is something that I was thinking about when I was finished with it, when I reread it. I doubt, again, that I will ever read this again. But the main interest for this book will be, well, what about Lieutenant Commander Finney? He has a whole story. And I know that his story is continued in other Star Trek novels, and maybe even in a video game. There's a lot to his story that isn't in the episode Court Martial and that isn't in this book. Court Martial, of course, being the only thing that's canon. But the thing that struck me about it when I was reading this book is how much I wish there were a thriving subgenre of Star Trek fiction that did not involve the Enterprise, or Kirk, or Spock, except for one chapter. How much I wish there were a subgenre of Star Trek fiction, not fan fiction, but published fiction, that told the stories of these great characters that we only meet as they glance by in one episode. I would like a whole... I know that Samuel Cogley has had a wretched Star Trek novel, but it didn't tell his story. It was just him involved in another case. I'd love a novel about Samuel Cogley, his whole life. I would love a novel like that. I'd love the story of Ariel Shaw. not just how she met and went to bed with a young Jim Kirk, but what happens to her the rest of the time. These characters are drawn so well in their one brief appearances in Star Trek that you want more of them. I would even want, I mean, in Star Trek you get a lot more about Lieutenant Commander Ben Finney than you do about any of these other characters. I'd like, a big full-dress story of his life. Maybe even daringly from his own point of view, because he becomes maniacally jealous of Jim Kirk. That would be fascinating to find a writer who could convey that. We saw something close to it earlier with that novel Garth of Izar, but it wasn't the story of Garth of Izar, despite its title. It was about him trying to come back to the Federation after his story. So we get a few flashbacks, but you don't have the whole thing told as though it were its own story, without any reference to Jim Kirk and crew. And I think that about so many characters in Star Trek. I would love to see stories like that about Richard Daystrom, the inventor of the duotronic circuits that run the Enterprise. I'd love to see that about Miranda Jones, the blind human telepath who's taught her skills on Vulcan, and a whole bunch of others. You will have favorites of your own from the original Star Trek show. There are standout characters in almost every episode that I anyway, want to know more about. And just the only way I can go is little glancing bits like this in the books. I'll take it. I'll definitely take it. That, as far as I know, outside of fan fiction, that subgenre does not exist. As far as I know, if anyone's written an epic Edith Keeler novel, it's only in fan fiction, unfortunately. But that's what I thought about with this book. There's precious little else. It's competently done, but there's precious little else when it comes to this book to think about. Other than, oh yeah, what about Lieutenant Commander Finney? What about him? I think even the same thing about the Klingons that we meet. Not so much, not so much, there are a couple of unidentified Klingons, but Kor, Kang, and Koloth, I would love to have a whole novel about them. As far as I know, they don't exist. There's a series of Star Trek novels about a Klingon warship, the Gorkon, that we will get to in BookTrek 2022. Spin-off stuff like that I myself will, if BookTrek 2022 exists, I will get to those then. But for now, we're just dealing with these templates of the original series, and this is the kind of that's the reason why I came to a lot of these books. Was I would buy them for $4 at the bookstore, and I would think, okay, well, this isn't going to be anything to write home about, prose-wise or plot-wise, but maybe I'll get the author's speculation on what happened to this character or that character. I think probably the character that gets the most treatment like that is the female Romulan commander. But in the Enterprise incident from the original series. But there are plenty of other candidates. And this is one of those. So unless you're really interested in that kind of thing, I don't know that this has a whole lot to recommend it. So I'm hoping for better. Tomorrow I'm picking these books basically at random at night, right when I'm settling my evening's reading. And I'd rather not that my original series run here on BookTrek 2021 goes out with a whimper. Now, the perfect solution to that is something that a number of you have emailed me and said. I made sort of an informal rule for myself in August, actually in all of BookTrek 2021, not to revisit favorite novels of mine, because that feels a little boring. The key to events like this is that you want to expand your horizons just a little. A number of you said, all right, well, you've done that all month long. You've made a ton of videos about books that you hadn't read in a long time. Maybe to go out on a strong note, you could revisit some books that you really love. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I will. We'll see what tonight's search on the ebooks yields. But in the meantime, Star Trek Renegade for BookTrek 2021. As we slowly close in, the weather doesn't. We are slowly closing in on September, when we will move to the next generation. I have to believe, just from demographics, I have to believe that the next generation is, for most of you, your Star Trek. I have to believe that's true. And that Mark Richardson of Richardson Reads and I are kind of exceptions in eating, sleeping, and breathing the original series, and then watching the others, but not with that resonance. I have to believe that's true, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll find out next month. But we're going to stick with the original crew for the rest of August. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.